Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. Time for an update on these cryptocurrency markets. We'll be looking at Bitcoin, Ethereum, Litecoin, and a few other of the bigger cap names. I'll look at Ripple or Tron or some of these others here. Try to make it a shorter one for you guys. Want to just give you guys an update as we continue to see the selling pressure on the overall market. It started last Thursday. For those of you that caught the video I posted, it was really just a clip out of our live stream that I do for the Node Insiders, and was just kind of telling the group how I had decided to clear my positions, exit everything as a result of the failed breakout over 9K, and really just some of the underlying technicals, the fact that we were very extended, and the big bearish reversal we saw, and sure enough, that played out to the downside. I was expecting a bounce, and as I told the group, a lot's going to tell on how this bounce plays out, if it makes a lower high and begins rolling over. And that's exactly what happened over the weekend. Didn't do any trading, just kind of watch things as they play out. But I will get into the charts here. But clearly here, looking at the daily chart, we're breaking below here these moving averages. The 10 EMA is now starting to curl downward. Hasn't yet had a bearish crossover over the 22 EMA, but it's not looking good at the moment. Volume on the sell side has certainly been much higher than volume on the upside. You'll see that clearly when we look at the lower time frames, but the big picture is certainly under pressure. The trend is clearly starting to shift, and it's really been the first time in quite some time, and as everybody knows, it was just well overdue. We had just had this incredible rally up to 9K from that breakout over 4K, and we were just due. If we go to the weekly chart real quick here, you can see that the week closed in the green, but it really just printed this big doji, generally a warning sign, a little bit of a reversal signal. I was already out of the market at the time, but it closed in the weekly doji here, and usually the way this works is it's confirmation when price starts to close below that point. That was really 8,000 was the low of that candle, just slightly below 8K. Clearly we are now below 8K, so you are seeing some confirmation on that. Again, on the weekly chart was very extended. The RSI was here pushing 80. It was pretty stretched over even just the 10 EMA on the weekly, which is still down here at the 6Ks, the upper 6Ks. The 22 is down here still at 5,900. So it was just due for some pause, and this is really the first big red week we're seeing so far. There's plenty of time left in this week, so a lot can happen, but for now it's certainly looking bearish, looking like we're due for a little bit of a pause. And as I said, it was really needed. We need to set a higher low on this weekly chart, and so I'll be looking at some targets on the downside, just kind of setting the big picture before we dive in to some of the lower time frames. So before we do that, let's hop over to the coin market cap just to get a quick look at the overall space. Clearly a red day across the board. Bitcoin down almost 9% in the last 24 hours as I record this. ETH, Ripple, Bitcoin Cash, Litecoin all following suits. Most names are down about the same. Once you start getting to the mid-tier small cap names, they are down a little bit more on a percentage basis than Bitcoin, as is generally the way it plays out when we see the overall space start to pull in. Going back to the chart here, so let's take a look at the daily chart here. Some key levels to be watching. I will do some Fibonacci analysis just to kind of look at some targets that way, but at the end of the day, the price support levels are always the most important. Those are the levels that I'm watching here. And so just looking at some of the recent history, you had this big wick lower here around that $6,600 level, and then of course the most recent support came in here basically around 7,200 to 7,400, and that's the price that we're seeing at this moment. We saw a quick flush under 7,500, a quick bounce over that here just a little bit ago before I started recording this. And so in the near term, these are some levels to be watching here as far as price support goes, but most importantly on the way up are what are those resistance levels to be watching. And right now the first level is that 8,200. That's going to be a big level to be cleared, and then 8K psychological is another level to be watching. I expect a little bit of a bounce into that. I have started to pick up a little bit of position for some oversold bounces on the shorter time frames, but in the big picture, I'm still cautious. I think this has got more to go on the downside personally, but in the end, I'm just going to take it day by day and wait for the price action to really start to confirm one way or the other. Looking at the retracement levels, if we just do a Fibonacci analysis from the $4,200 breakout to the swing high that we saw here, you can see the 382 level lines up pretty closely to that 7,200 level. The 50% retracement lines up very well to that 6,600 level, and then below that, the 6,000 level is the 618 retracement. You don't want to see it get much below that. Personally, I think if we saw 6,000 again, it would probably scare a lot of people, but it would be a healthy pullback. And that's generally where we would want to see some strong support coming in, somewhere between those two levels. Not saying it's going to get down to that far, but if we're looking at some retracement levels, those are the way the retracement levels line up. But at the end of the day, I'm going to be looking at price action. I'll be looking for those strong reversals, the buying volume to come back in, and price to start trading back above some key moving averages again. Let's dial it in here, go to the 4-hour view. So looking at the 4-hour view, since that failed breakout attempt and quick reversal last Thursday, we saw a pretty quick flush to the downside, bottomed out around 79.80. We had a good bounce, and that set a lower high on the daily chart, and then of course over the weekend and then into yesterday really started to sell off again, and that really accelerated here today to the downside. That has since brought the 4-hour RSI into this oversold territory, now in the 22 level. Was lower here earlier as price had that flush down into that 7,400 range, but bouncing back a little bit. It's due for a little bit of a bounce action here. I've pretty much been out of the market since up here. I jumped on a live stream for the Node Insiders here at this level. We were in some trades in terms of the alts side of things, and generally up until this point I've been trading in and out of Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin through most of this, and just kind of trading in and out of alts for those names that are outperforming. This was really the first time in a long time that I exited positions into dollar and dollar equivalents such as Tether, just because the action was pretty bearish and we were pretty extended to the upside, and that proved to be a pretty good decision at that point. Now we're looking at where's the downside target, where do we start scaling back in, and where is the ultimate low at that point. So that's really the question everyone's asking. In the big picture, I'm still bullish. I think the long-term trend is still positive, but this is just a healthy pullback, healthy correction. How low it goes is anyone's guess. There's certainly some targets to be looking at. But in the near term, so looking at the 4-hour view, it is bouncing here a little bit. I think it's due for a bounce. If we dial into the 1-hour chart here, I took a shot at it earlier here at these lows around that 75, and then I added a little bit on the upside. Had that quick flush earlier, wicked me out, but I jumped right back in just because the lower time frames were showing some reversal. We'll zoom into the 15-minute real quick just to show you what I was watching here. I was really watching this 7,500 level. That got flushed, but the buying volume on the following candle was much higher, and once it cleared the top of that candle, I realized that was a little bit of a flush, jumped right back into my positions. And so this will be the second attempt. That's generally at most as much as I'll give it on a bounce attempt. These are just oversold bounce trades. Bigger picture, not getting aggressive yet. I'm going to wait for the higher time frame really to start confirming that the pullback is good. For now, just taking these little bounces on the way up. What I'm looking for here is a clear above this near-term resistance around 7,700. If we can clear that, then your next big level to be watching is going to be 7,850, 7,860, and then above that 8,000. I really think the 8K level is going to be a little bit of a wall. If it gets above that, 8,200 is your next level, but I'd really be surprised if we saw much more than 8K here in the near term, just because the sellers are really in control right now, and I think bounces are going to start to be sold into for those that have ridden kind of this first leg down. Buyers may be looking to start scaling out into those bounces, and so just something I'm going to be paying attention to. Again, it's just going to all depend on the price action. For me, those are the levels I'm watching on the way up, and after that I'll start scaling out, taking some gains, and then we'll see what happens from there. If it starts to hold and we start to set higher lows, then I may look to start scaling at that point. So that's what I'm going to be watching here. For those of you that were asking on Twitter about, hey, how have I been communicating some of this here, for those of you that are members of the Node Insiders group here or members of the Slack community, I do post my live streams here on this webinars tab, as well as on the Slack channel. So if you're in the Slack channel, I generally will announce it either the day before or that morning saying, hey, I'm going to go live. Here's a link, and then I'll send a reminder before I go live. And those are generally private live streams for the Node Insiders. So if you're wondering where those are, you can certainly rewatch them. I always post the last few here on this page, and then of course on the Slack channel if you're part of that group. So how do you get in that group? Of course, if you're a subscriber to this, or if you've purchased the video course, you will get an invite to the Slack group. If you haven't and you have purchased this, send me an email or send me a quick tweet, and I will make sure we get that invite out to you. So that's going to be it for Bitcoin. Let's jump into some of the other altcoins. What are the levels I'm watching here? What are some of the names holding up well? Looking for a little bit of oversold bounce here in the near term, but I think the broader trend is still very much downward. I'm going to look at some alt BTC pairs because that's really what I'm interested in right now. What are those names outperforming Bitcoin? Looking at ETH, I was watching this one here and it had a very nice push off that support level when Bitcoin attempted that breakout over 9K. That quickly reversed and ended up in the red, so clearly I got out of that position, but it's been holding up pretty good since then relative to Bitcoin. Of course, on the USD side, ETH, just along with every other name, has pulled in pretty good, but we're seeing this one hold up versus BTC. It's not taking more of a hit, so I'm watching this one. If it starts to outperform, then this is going to be one to be paying attention to. This would also be a good signal for the overall altcoin space in terms of relative performance to Bitcoin. If Bitcoin decides to just find a low here and then begin a consolidation, chop around a little bit, I think that would be positive for the alt space, as some of these have really had a pretty good downtrend here in recent months because Bitcoin has been so strong. We may begin to see some rotation out of BTC into some of these alts if and when Bitcoin can find a low and begin to stabilize and form a new base. So that's just something I'm going to be paying attention to here. But looking at ETH BTC on the BTC pair here, if it holds above this 3,000 level, that's going to be positive here. That's really the breakout point. And for the last week or so, that's been where support has continued to show up. Now I want to see it confirmed to the upside, getting above that 3,200 level again on a closing basis would certainly be positive. Looking at Litecoin as another name to be watching here. Of course, this has some fundamental catalysts in terms of the halving coming up here in a couple of months and could continue to see a boost from that perspective. I was in a Litecoin trade here prior to the sell-off in Bitcoin as it had bounced off of this double bottom, but kind of just stalled out, got out of the position. It was a little bit more of a precaution, took my gains, but I'm still watching it here just because it's held up again pretty well versus Bitcoin. And if Bitcoin finds a low here, this is one I'm going to be paying attention to for some potential outperformance. I do want to see it clear that 1,400 level again versus Bitcoin. And if it can do that, then I'll be looking for about 15.1 to 15.3 as the next target on the upside. Taking a quick look at Litecoin on the dollar pair here. I'm going to go to the Coinbase exchange for that. There's a couple of levels I'm watching here as support. That $100 mark, that round number, has continued to act as a level of support. We saw this rally pull back here today, quickly dipped under in and around that $99 mark. Now clearly this is not a bullish looking chart from that perspective in terms of the selling volume continues to come in, now closing below some key moving averages. So still remain cautious, but I am watching for a potential bounce off of this area. Ultimately, if it can begin to clear that 115 level again, that's going to be positive and could set up for another run going into that halving. Again, the 140s, 160s is really the next targets to be looking at on the upside. So I'm going to be paying attention on all of these names at the lower time frames here, seeing if we can begin to see some early signals of support coming in, some potential reversals. But if you look at even just the 4-hour charts, still below the 10 EMA, still below the 22 EMA. And so those are going to be your first targets of resistance on the way up. So for Litecoin on the dollar pair, that's going to be that 105 to 108 level. If we look at ETH on the dollar pair, that's going to be your 250 to around 255 as the upside resistance targets. Those are going to be the first levels that it needs to clear on the way up. Quickly looking at a few alts that have held up relatively well here. The first one is Tron. Now this is Tron on the dollar pair. And the reason I'm pointing this one out is because it had a significant break above resistance here a few days back. That was basically around that 3-cent mark. It had been on a price level that had just struggled to get above here for almost a year now. If you go back to August of last year, that's where it broke down below that and has been trading consistently below that up until a few weeks ago. We saw that break higher, pulling right back to that support level, bouncing, and it's still holding up above that. The moving averages are still trending higher. Volume is picking up. Yes, we know Justin likes to pump. Yes, there's some, news, and yes, he's meeting with Warren Buffett. All that aside, just looking at the pure technicals, I'm keeping an eye on this one just because it has been showing some relative strength compared to many of the other alts versus Bitcoin. Long term, Not really my cup of tea. So sorry if you're a Tron maximalist out there, but from a trading perspective, certainly we'll take advantage of some of those quick moves. I don't have any problems with that. I'll trade Tron, I'll trade Ripple, I'll trade most of those other names from short-term perspective. So just something I'm watching here, keeping an eye on this one. Has been holding up relatively well. So one to be watching. Now I did hit my first target on the way up, which was that 4 cent mark, and then I was looking for about 4.5, and then above that basically 5 cent on the way up. So those are the next levels to be watching. Speaking of Ripple, XRP, BTC here, another one to be watching here, still holding up, pulled back, making a higher low, and just over the last week or so has been sitting tight, sitting flat versus BTC. If we dial it in, look at the shorter time frame, you see a little bit of a potential base being set here. I'm watching this almost handle type of formation. Ultimately, I want to see price break above this little bit of a consolidation zone. If we can get back above, call it 52.50 on the BTC pair, then that's going to be an alt I'm going to be looking at relative to the BTC side. So something to be watching there. There's been a few others that are kind of pointing out, sticking out here a little bit in terms of strength. We could look at ZIL. ZIL has been trending higher. It is bumping up against the prior swing highs right now, so it needs to break out right in this level. Looking at one, of course, has been one of the recent additions here. Had a very nice move regardless of what the market's doing. I know some of the folks in the Slack group have been writing this one up. We looked at this one during yesterday's live stream as it was breaking out. Nice move today. Again, right back at this resistance, so something to be watching. If it breaks out above that 330, then it's an all-time highs, and at that point it's anyone's guess how high it goes. Does it pull off another Matic or one of these other names that had those monster runs? The environment's different now, and with each of these, the effect is going to be less and less pronounced, as we've seen with some of the other names. So just something to make note of, and if Bitcoin is going to provide headwinds, maybe this one doesn't run quite as strong as some of these others. Nonetheless, it's had a pretty decent run, had this strong pullback, but even off the pullback, up 44% since that low here. So definitely one to be watching here from a near-term perspective. If we go to the insiders list real quick, taking a look at the watch list, of course, everything is showing weak. This has been flashing caution for some time now, and of course is confirming with the overall market dropping here today. But going to the automated watch list, some of the names that are holding up well, showing some top BMI, and of course the list is relatively short here today with everything in the red. Ethereum, Binance, basic attention. We looked at ZIL, Qlink, VeChain are some of the names to keep an eye on here in terms of relative strength versus BTC. If we hop back to the BTC chart real quick, again, the 4-hour 10 EMA currently stands just shy of 8K. That's really the first level to be watching on the way up. That was also the swing high of these last few candles before today's big drop. And then above that, the 22 EMA, which again happens to line up pretty well with 8,200. And those are really the two big levels that I'm going to be watching here in the near term in terms of potential resistance. So for now, that's the levels to be watching. Near term, the trend is downward on the higher time frames. We are potentially seeing a trend change, a larger time frame trend change. Could it be a 1-week shift? Could it be a 2-3 week shift? It's anyone's guess. No doubt we were overdue, well overdue for some sort of pause, some sort of pullback. And I, for one, welcome this as a way to kind of reset things, cool things off a little bit, and then set a higher low and establish a new base, a new support level from which we can see another leg up. So for now, just looking for some bounce action here in the near term, and then after that, we'll see how things go from there. So thanks for watching, guys. I'll catch you all in the next one. Till next time, take care, everyone.